Thanks, Chester. All right. Thank you, Chester. Chester is also my eye doctor. And so he has taken really good care of me and my eyes, and I appreciate that very much. And it is great to be here with you guys. I love coming to New North and see a lot of familiar faces, and this is just kind of like coming home to me in many ways. So I'm really glad to be here with you today. Some of you know my family, some of you don't, but you can see a little photograph there of my family. My wife, Lynn, we've been married for 42 years. Pretty amazing. And we got married when we were 6. No, not really. But yeah, 42 years married to a very brilliant and beautiful woman, and I'm very blessed. And yeah, we have 3 kids, adults. Our daughter, Anne-Marie, she and her husband live in Minneapolis. They have 3 kids, and our daughter, Kim, and her husband, Assad, they live just right around the corner from us with their 2 boys, and she's expecting another. And then our son, Matt, and his wife, Megan, live in Utah, and he's a football coach, and she's in nursing school. So anyway, that's my family, and I know some of you know them. But tonight, I am speaking about the whole topic of legacy. And I want to talk to you men about what it means to make a legacy. What does that look like in our lives? And I think it probably is good just to start out by asking the question, well, what is a legacy? When we use that word and we hear that a lot, what does it really mean? What do we mean when we say legacy? And the dictionary says legacy is an amount of money or property left to someone in a will. Now, I would say that's a pretty narrow definition of a legacy. In a broader sense, a legacy is anything you leave behind to others. Anything you leave behind to others. Will somebody get me that little trophy right there? I forgot to bring that up. Thank you so much. No, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so you leave things behind to others, sometimes intentionally, and there may be some things that you leave behind for others unintentionally, right? And any of those things can be called a legacy. So I have right here, I have a little trophy, and it's heavy, right? This is like solid, you know? Probably not silver, it's probably lead, but it's really heavy. And on it, it says, J. Mitchell, May 9th, 1915, champion pool player of the Pacific Coast. My grandfather passed away right before I was born, and so I never knew him, obviously, and this is the only thing I have of his. This is really my only really knowledge of him is the fact that he was, I guess, a great pool player, right? And won the pool championship in 1915 of the entire Pacific Coast. So, you know, that's a legacy, you might say, that he left. I could only find 2 places in the Bible where the word legacy is actually used. And it's interesting because both of them are used in a negative sense. So let me show you what those are. First of all, Proverbs 3:35 says, "The wise shall inherit glory, but shame shall be the legacy of fools." Shame shall be the legacy of fools. So that's interesting when you think that we can leave, either intentionally or unintentionally, we can leave shame as our legacy. And then Ecclesiastes 3 says, when there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and a great evil. So Solomon in Ecclesiastes is kind of this old, cynical man, and he's basically saying, here you are, you work your tail off your whole life long, and then you just give everything you've earned, you give it over to someone who hasn't even worked for it. And he says, man, this is vanity. This is a great evil. So legacy is used primarily negatively in the Bible. I would say that we all have a legacy. We all have a legacy. And it might be helpful to think about what are the different kinds of legacies that you might leave. So let me just go through this. First of all, there's the financial aspect, which our definition highlighted. So Proverbs says a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. So I think it's important for all of us to think through, what do we really believe about inheritance? And it's interesting, I talk to a lot of men about this, especially my age, right? I talk to a lot of men about inheritance. What do you think about inheritance? What do you believe about inheritance? Is it a good thing to leave a bunch of money to your kids? Is it not so good a thing? Are you one of those guys that's gonna like, hey, we're gonna spend it all, we're not leaving a dime for our kids? You know, I know people who have done great good with the money that they leave behind. And honestly, I know people who have done great damage with the money they've left behind. I know people that have hurt people with how they chose to handle that issue, okay? So think about the financial legacy that you will live. Secondly, spiritual. There's a spiritual legacy that we leave. Listen to what the Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians. He said, what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. So he's speaking to Timothy, sort of his young disciple, if you will. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So we leave a legacy, a spiritual legacy in our loved ones and those we care about in terms of, you know, what we've learned, what we've received, what we've heard, what they've seen in us. Practice these things. I would ask you the question, do your loved ones, do they know what you believe? Do they know what you believe? Do they know the story of how you came to know Jesus Christ? Do they know that story? Have they ever heard you pray? Have they ever, like, kind of inadvertently caught you reading God's word? You know? So we leave a spiritual legacy for those we leave behind, whether we have kids or not, okay? Thirdly, emotional. We leave an emotional legacy, Listen to what Paul said. He said, I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did with a clear conscience. As night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. So again, he's speaking to Timothy. Listen to what he says. Recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I mean, Paul, you know, we sometimes think of the Apostle Paul as this sort of like man's man, this stoic, you know, this hard driving kind of person or personality. Paul was a very emotional guy. And Paul connected with people. Paul had tons of friends. I mean, read the back pages of his letters. He's constantly greeting people, telling people how much he loved them, how much he cared for them, how much he appreciated them, right? And that's what he does here with Timothy. He leaves an emotional legacy. So I would just ask you, do you regularly express your feelings to your loved ones? Do you tell them how incredibly proud you are of them? Do you invest in them emotionally? So there's an emotional legacy we live. Finally, there's a practical legacy that we leave. So we rarely think of Jesus this way, but what did Jesus do for pretty much the first 30 years of his life? Yeah, he was a carpenter, right? I mean, so, you know, like, think about that. Jesus was a carpenter. Any carpenters here? Okay, one. Thank God we got a carpenter here. Yeah. I mean, you know, on one occasion, Jesus returned to his hometown. By then, people knew that he was out, you know, healing people and preaching and you know, kind of pretending to be a big shot in their minds. And I loved what the people of Nazareth said. They're kind of scratching their heads, and they said, isn't this the carpenter's son? That's really interesting. You think about that. I mean, and of course, back then, if you were a carpenter's son, you were a carpenter. That's how it worked. You took your dad's trade, right? But Jesus was a carpenter. His dad passed down a skill to him, right? What skills are you passing down to your children? My grandfather taught me to fish. You can see that's my brother. He's the tall one. I'm the little one. He's 2.5 years older. My brother was one of those kids that when he was probably like 6, he was shaving. He was 12 and he was like 6'4". I was one of those guys that didn't grow till I was like a junior in high school, right? So you can see the difference between us. But I want you to notice one thing there. Whose fish is bigger? Thank you. Thank you for noticing that. Right. But you know what? I learned how to fish from my grandpa. My grandpa used to teach my brother and I how to fish. And we'd go fishing a lot, and he taught us. I still, to this day, when I tie a hook to a line, I do it exactly the way my grandpa taught me, right? And he taught me that skill, and I'm thankful for that. What skills are you passing on? My wife is a fantastic grandmother, I gotta say. She really is. She's a way better grandmother than I am grandfather. But we've got this 10-year-old granddaughter, Peyton, and my wife is teaching her how to cook. Even though she lives in Minneapolis, every opportunity she has, they're in the kitchen, they're baking cookies, they're making this, they're making that. She's teaching her something that she loves to do. My wife loves to cook, thank goodness, and she's teaching our granddaughter how to do that. That's a practical legacy that you can leave, right? Maybe you work on cars. That's something you can pass on. Maybe you like maybe you're a cyclist. That's something you can pass on. But think about the practical legacy. I think one thing to remember about legacy is that we leave a legacy not just for others, but we leave a legacy in others. Listen to what John Maxwell wrote. He says, if you are successful, it becomes possible for you to leave an inheritance for others. But if you desire to create a legacy, then you need to leave something in others. When you think unselfishly and invest in others, you gain the opportunity to create a legacy that will outlive you. So I think this is important. The legacy we leave can't be separated from the life we live and the way we invest in those we care about and those we leave behind. I mean, think about who do you leave a legacy with? I realize not everybody has children, right? But you can have spiritual children, right? But children are part of who you leave a legacy with. Grandchildren, you leave a legacy with your friends. You leave a legacy with your coworkers. It's interesting, I do a lot of, I'm a pastor. I do a lot of funerals, right? I do a lot of memorial services. And I like to observe what people say about their loved one who's passed away at memorial services. And I gotta tell you, almost never have I heard anybody heard say something like this. You know what? He was a fantastic engineer. He was the best engineer I've ever known. Or he was a fantastic salesperson. I mean, this guy he just hit home runs every day as a salesperson. I've never heard that at a funeral. What I hear almost more like little things that person did that are memorable. I hear about how that guy, how nobody really knew it, but every day he would take out the old lady, her garbage across the street for her, and then put her garbage cans back. Little stuff like that. Those are the kind of stories people tell at funerals. Those are the kind of stories people remember. It's the little stuff like that. Now, I believe that sometimes we cannot see the legacy that we'll leave or even who we will leave it with. And I want to give you a little story here from the Bible that is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. He very possibly is somebody you have never heard of, but he's found in the Old Testament, and his name is Asher. His name is Asher. So let me tell you a little bit about this dude named Asher, okay? So Asher was the 8th son of the patriarch you probably have heard of, named Jacob. And remember, Jacob had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. And you might also remember that at different times when these two women struggled with infertility, both of them gave their handmaids to Jacob to produce children according to the custom of the day. So Asher was actually born from Leah's handmaid, Zilpah. He also had an older brother named Gad. It's very interesting. At Asher's birth, Leah, remember, Leah didn't really give birth to him, but he would be considered hers. At Asher's birth, Leah said, "Happy am I, for the women will call me happy." So she called him Asher. Guess what Asher means in Hebrew? Happy, right? So Happy Gilmore wasn't the first one to be called Happy, guys. But a great name, right? For a boy. Let's call him Happy. Let's call him Asher. But when you look at the way Asher started out, I'm not sure how happy he could have been. So again, think about it. He wasn't born from Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, right? He wasn't even born from Leah, but one of her handmaids. Asher did not have the honor of being the oldest son in the family. That would have been Reuben. Nor was he the strongest son. That probably would have been Judah. He wasn't the doted on youngest son. That would have been Benjamin. He wasn't the favorite son. That would have been Joseph. So Asher kind of lived his life in the shadows and kind of like he had to be content with the leftovers. Besides that, Asher grew up in one of history's most dysfunctional families. Okay, let's be honest, right? I mean, in this family, there was parental favoritism, there was sibling rivalry, there was deceit, there was long-standing bitterness and resentment. I mean, I hope you guys know that there are absolutely no perfect families in the Bible. I mean, the Bible most often portrays family not like a Norman Rockwell painting, with everybody beaming in gratitude on Thanksgiving Day, looking at the big turkey, but really as a series of broken relationships in need of redemption. But that doesn't excuse what Asher and his brothers did. So Asher and his brothers participated in something in their youth that was evil. So remember the story. Asher joined in on the selfish and hard-hearted scheme to have his half-brother Joseph thrown into a pit and later sold as a slave to a traveling caravan headed for Egypt. He would later watch as his father, his beloved father, grieved that loss. Years later, he was also part of a delegation of brothers that were petrified to see their brother Joseph again, who now was second in command in Egypt. I mean, Asher, you got to admit, Asher did not have a great start in life, right? Now, here's the deal. I'm not sure how it happened. I'm not sure when it happened, but somewhere along the line in Asher's life, something changed. And I'm convinced of that. And I'm not exactly sure how it happened or when it happened, but I believe something happened and he became a different man. And again, we'll never know for sure what brought about his transformation. I think it was God, but we do know for sure that Asher, probably without ever knowing it, actually left a legacy of wisdom, of faith, of character, and of service to the nation at large. A legacy not only attached to him, but to his descendants. Now, how do I know that? So first of all, we know that when Asher went to Egypt, he became the father of 4 sons. We learn that in the Bible. Imnah, Ishvi, and Beriah, right? We also know he had a daughter, and her name was Serah, S-E-R-A-H. Now, what's fascinating about this is that Serah was the only granddaughter mentioned among 53 grandsons in the lineage of Jacob. The only granddaughter. Now, that's not because there weren't other granddaughters, but it was customary in a patriarchal society to list only the sons, right? For some reason, this one single woman, Serah, was not left out, couldn't be left out. And it's interesting, this is not recorded in the Bible, but Jewish history actually says that she was a woman of great virtue and went on to have a huge impact. What's even more interesting is Jewish rabbinical literature says Sarah was actually Asher's stepdaughter. Isn't that interesting? So apparently Asher had married a widow named Hadurah when Sarah was 3 years old. So Asher was the father of what we would call a blended family. He welcomed Sarah into his home. He raised her as his own. And to be included in his lineage as the only granddaughter, she must have had a very special place in his heart, and she must have lived an exemplary life. So not only was Asher the father of 4 sons and a daughter, but when his father, Jacob, was preparing to die, he brought each of his 12 sons to his bedside, remember, to give them a blessing. One by one, he gave them a special last word, a special blessing. Honestly, if you look at what he said to many of his sons, it really wasn't so nice. But listen to what he said to Asher. Jacob said to Asher, Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. It almost sounds like he would become a culinary expert, doesn't it? But more likely, it points to some kind of abundance or prosperity. So now, fast forward 400 years. Asher's long gone, right? But his descendants aren't. The tribe of Asher, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Asher is still very much alive. The people of Israel are getting ready to go in and conquer the promised land, okay? Moses is preparing to die, but before he dies, he's gonna give his own blessing to each one of the tribes. Moses is gonna do that. He runs through 11 tribes, and yet he doesn't address them in the customary order, but he waits to the end, for the very last one to the end, to speak to the tribe of Asher. And listen to what he says about this tribe. He says, most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil. I don't know what that means, but it sounds good, right? The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, security. And your strength will equal your days, longevity. Wow. So think about those words. I mean, not only what they mean for Asher's descendants, but for us. This is an amazing thing to say about a man's legacy who's been gone 400 years, especially a man who started as bad as Asher. Matter of fact, I preached a sermon on Asher once. I called it Average Asher, right? But it's a reminder, his story to me is a great reminder that we cannot measure the impact of our legacy during our lives. It'd be nice if I could stand up here and tell you guys, here's how you gotta leave a great legacy, you know? And we all wanna leave a legacy. We all wanna leave a great legacy, and it's good to talk about that. But the bottom line is, you can die, and you can die thinking, you know what? I'm not sure if I left any legacy at all. And I'm not sure if the legacy I left was even good or not, but you never know. You never know the impact that your life will have on future generations, okay? I think that's what we learn from Asher. We don't always get to see the legacy we live. We can't always see how the choices that we make today will impact our children, our children's children, and even their children. Because again, here's a man who seemed very average, raised in one of the most dysfunctional homes recorded in the Bible. Here's a man who made some colossal mistakes early in his life that left deep wounds in his family of origin. Sprinkle on top of that the added challenges of raising a blended family of 4 sons and a stepdaughter while married to a woman who had lost her first husband, and most of us would think Asher wouldn't produce much lasting at all. A very average man, but also a man whose legacy was greatly blessed. A legacy of abundant posterity, a legacy of favor with his brothers, a legacy of feet dipped in oil, and a legacy of strength to withstand the enemy. Pretty amazing story. So with that, let me just ask another question. So how then do we leave a lasting legacy, a good and lasting legacy? So first of all, just ask yourself, like, okay, who do I want to leave a legacy with? Who do I want to leave a legacy with? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? How will I go about it? The second thing I would say is I would encourage you to be very intentional about investing time with the people you want to leave a legacy with. I mean, nothing can really replace being with people, investing time in people, whether it's your kids or your grandkids or your nieces or your nephews or the neighbor kid down the street or a young man at your table of men's fraternity. Invest time. One of the things, we have 3 grandkids that live a long way away. So, hey, we invested in one of these like Alexa things where you say, hey, Alexa, call my grandchildren in Minneapolis. Boom, they're on the screen. We're talking to our grandchildren in Minneapolis. It's awesome. I don't know how it works, but it works. It's great. Also, another thing I would say, watch for spontaneous opportunities. Watch for spontaneous opportunities. It's funny, we had our granddaughter, this is 4 or 5 years ago, she was visiting us. And the subject came up of she didn't know how to ride a bike. So she's 5 years old. I mean, I don't know about you, but 5-year-old kids need to ride a bike, right? You need to get rid of the training wheels, you need to ride a bike. And she doesn't ride a bike. Her dad's a college football coach. He doesn't have time to teach her how to ride a bike. So I said, okay, that's my job. So I'm like, I don't know, last time it's been a long time since I taught one of my kids how to ride a bike, right? And I remember it being a very arduous process, skin knees and stitches in the chin and all those kinds of things. So I thought, I'm going to do this the right way this time, right? So I went online. I mean, you couldn't do that 30 years ago. So I went online. I got all these YouTube videos, and I learned how to teach a kid to ride a bike. It's fantastic. You know what you do? You get a bike, and you get the right size bike, right? And you find a park with little hills on it. And you go to the top of the hill. So it's grass. So if they fall, right, you don't go to the hospital, right? They're fine. And so I went through this whole thing. I had her riding her bike, her 2-wheeler bike, within 10 minutes. No kidding. She's riding all over the park. She's going, no, look at me. This is awesome. And so every time I see her now, I remind her, who taught you to ride a bike, right? But she'll never forget that, right? But that's part of the legacy you leave, right? And of course, it's not about riding a bike. It's about being with her, right? So anyway, another thing I would encourage you to do to leave a good legacy is tell stories. Tell stories. Psalm 78 says, we will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. I mean, you have stories that you tell your kids, your grandkids, again, nieces and nephews, whoever will listen. Stories of God's faithfulness in your life, stories of answered prayer, stories how God has come through for you, stories even of the really, really, really hard times in your life. Leave your kids a legacy of stories. My oldest daughter, she's 38, Anne-Marie, she gave me a gift a year ago Christmas, so not this last Christmas. And she said, Dad, you're going to love this, and I'm going to love it too. And there's a company called Storyworth. Storyworth. I think that's one word, by the way, Storyworth. You can look it up. And she said, Dad, every week for 52 weeks, they're going to send you a question about your life. And you're going to answer it and send the email right back to them. And then at the end of the year, they're going to make a book about your life. And that's going to be a gift for Christmas that you have and that you can give to your family. So I did it, man, 52 weeks, like tell us about your first job, what was the first car you ever owned? What were your parents like? What's your favorite vacation as a kid? I mean, just, how did you become a Christian? So I don't know if it's a Christian company or not, but they asked that question, right? So man, I did that every week. I did that 52 weeks. You send pictures in there. I got a picture of my first car, my 64 Ford Fairlane, aqua blue, 3 on the tree, awesome car. Found it online, put it on there, it's in there. And I've got that book, and my grandkids got that book, my kids got that book, but all I was doing in that book is telling stories, right? Telling stories. So tell stories. Some people do it differently. They write a legacy letter. Write a legacy letter. So you want to leave something. You want to say something to a loved one. Write a long letter to them and tell them what you want to tell them, so that when you die, they have that letter and they can read that. Next, about how to leave a good and lasting legacy. Make amends before you die. Make amends. Let me tell you 4 phrases that you have to learn to use to leave a good legacy. Number 1, please forgive me. So who do you need to say that to? Please forgive me. Number 2, I forgive you. I can't tell you how many people die without saying those words. I forgive you. Number 3, thank you. Who do you need to say thank you to? And number 4, I love you. These are hard words, for men often to say to anybody, right? But those 4 statements are really important statements to leave a legacy. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my dad. I think some of you might have even met my dad. I'm not sure, but he hung around CPC for a while before he passed away and all. But a little bit about my dad. So my dad, his name is Stuart Willard Mitchell. He died about 5 years ago. And by the way, raised in San Bruno. His dad actually, this guy right here, was a tinter at the Fuller Paint Company in South San Francisco. I don't know if anybody remembers where that was. It's not there anymore. I think Genentech or somebody's there, but yep. Anyway, but my dad was an interesting guy. He grew up. He was the only child. My dad, I think, kind of had an unhappy growing up in some ways. My father was drafted, or not, actually he enlisted when he was 18 into World War II. He fought on the front lines in the infantry in the Pacific Campaign. 2 years, 18 years old, scared to death, saw lots of really bad stuff. But while he was there, his mother committed suicide. And she thought, he's my only son, and, he's probably not going to make it. And she took her life, So incredible tragedy, really, in his life. And they didn't even let him go home to do any grieving or anything like that. But anyway, he got home, he married my mom, and he became a dentist. Became actually a very successful dentist in Palo Alto. He owned his own dental building. He was at one time, he was like some big guy in the American Dental Society or whatever it is, and had a great career as a dentist. My dad was amazing. He was an accomplished fly fisherman, and it's interesting because remember I said earlier that my grandpa taught us to fish. One thing my dad was really, really poor at was teaching us to do stuff. He had no patience. So my dad was an outstanding fly fisherman, but I learned how to fish from my grandpa, right? Because my dad didn't have the patience to teach us. But he was an outstanding fly fisherman, an outstanding hunter. He did teach me to hunt. He was a huge bird hunter, pheasant, duck, and dove as well. And he was a pilot. So he flew a plane, had an instruments license, the whole deal. So that's a lot right there. My dad also did a wonderful thing in that he put away a chunk of money for each one of his 6 grandchildren for college. So when all 6 of his grandchildren went to college, there was a chunk of money for them. Didn't get them all the way through, but it got them most of the way through. That he did that. He wanted them to go to college. That was important to him. So that was a fantastic thing my dad did. And honestly, I think the most significant legacy that my dad left for me and my brother and my kids and my brother's kids is a legacy of a changed life. because my dad, by the time he was 69, my mom had passed away suddenly at age 63. My dad had actually become an alcoholic. And, classic of that generation of people, you come home and you have a couple of martinis and you do that for about 25 years, and pretty soon the martinis start at 10 a.m. instead of 5 p.m., right? And so by the time my dad's 69 and he's drunk, he had to retire, and he was a mess. And the third time he went through rehab, he was at Sequoia Hospital, and there was a doctor there that I went in to see my dad at Sequoia, and there was a doctor there, I think his name was Barry Rosen, and he looked at me and he said, this is the first thing he said. He said, your dad's gonna die. I'm like, yeah, nice to meet you too, He said, your dad's gonna die. He's killing himself. And thank God my dad actually got sober. And the only reason he got sober was because he accepted Jesus Christ into his life as his Lord and Savior. And he had gone through, 12-step stuff and all that stuff, and he could never accept the idea of a higher power, could never surrender his life to God. And ironically, I'm the pastor, my brother the shoe salesman, my brother led him to Christ. Kind of bummed me out, but no. But my dad, he was 69 at the time. My dad never took another drink. He died when he was 89. He never took another drink. And he was a changed man. He was really a different man. And I could go on and on about the ways that we saw his life transform. But my grandchildren, so at his funeral, which took place at CPC, at his funeral, every single one, all 6 of his grandchildren did a eulogy. They all insisted. And it was really wild because none of them, they didn't prepare together. They didn't compare notes or like, you say this and I'll say this or anything. They just got up there and did their thing. Every single one of them said, I was his favorite. Every single one of them believed that. My dad had this way, especially later in life, where he would walk up to his grandchildren. He would literally cup their head in his hands, and he put their face right next to his, and he would say, I love you. He would do that. And that's a legacy that he left. He left that amazing legacy of a changed life and of a man who loved them deeply. I don't think my dad, honestly, sat there and thought through what kind of legacy he wanted to leave for his grandkids. I don't think he planned that, right? I think he just loved them. He just invested in them. I don't think my dad died thinking he left much of anything at all in terms of a legacy, but he did. I'm going to show you a film right now, and it's 5 minutes long. We okay time-wise, Chester? Where are you? We're good. Okay, thank you. I'm going to show you a film right now, and let me just introduce it, because I think it'll just leave you in a place where you can think about your own legacy, okay? And so it's a movie some of you saw. It's anybody see Mr. Holland's Opus? Long time ago, Richard Dreyfuss, okay? Yeah. So let me just, for you guys that didn't see it, let me give you a little background. So it's a movie about a frustrated composer in Portland, Oregon, who takes a job as a high school band teacher in the 1960s. So he's been diverted from his lifelong dream of achieving fame as a classical musician. His name is Glenn Holland, played by Richard Dreyfuss. He believes that this measly teaching job, teaching high school students music, is just kind of a temporary stop on his way to fame. And at first, he maintains his determination to write his opus, his concerto, by composing at his piano after putting in a full day with his students. Like, every day I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna write my masterpiece. But life happens. Family demands increase. He has a son who happens to be deaf. The pressures of his job multiply. Mr. Holland recognizes that his dream of leaving a lasting musical legacy is just a dream. And at the end of the movie, we find an aged Mr. Holland fighting in vain to keep his job, like we see so happen today. The school board has reduced the operating budget by cutting music and drama out. And so no longer a reluctant band teacher, Mr. Holland believes in what he does, and he passionately defends the role of the arts in public education. And so what started for him as like a detour in his career had become a 35-year mission. He had poured his lives into many young people. And so in this scene, Mr. Holland returns to his classroom to retrieve his belongings after a few days after school is left off for summer vacation. So he's taught his final class. And with a lot of regret and a lot of sorrow, maybe even a tinge of anger, he fills a box with artifacts that represent the tools of his trade and the memories of all his classes. His wife and son soon arrive. So I'm going to show this, and then I'll just come up briefly for a moment when we're done watching. Let's watch this. All right. Well, I hope that that inspired you. You know that the symphony, if you will, of our lives is really, it's all about the people that we touch, right? It's not about the fame that we achieve. It's not about having some, our name on some building somewhere in perpetuity, but it's really about the people that we invest in, the people that we touch. So you guys, thanks for letting me be here with you tonight. You guys have some questions, I believe. Are they coming up on the board, Chester, then for discussion in your groups, and hopefully have a good discussion. Thank you.